Climate fanatics exploit Jasper wildfire anniversary and a new report. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. Today I have a new video explainer for you. I'm going to go through it rather quickly, otherwise it'll be too long to watch it comfortably. But I want to discuss a new report that came out about the after action related to the Jasper wildfire and the various parties involved. It appeared to blame Alberta in one sentence that all the pundits and critics jumped on. Subsequently, Jasper issued a 2-page press release outlining all of the good things that Alberta did do during the wildfire. But I want to discuss that. And another interesting aspect of this is the nudge unit, the climate change behavior units that your government is funding to try and coerce you into climate compliance. And the exploitation of wildfire tragedies is a big part of their stock and trade. Now, when I was looking for the wildfire report in question, I ran across the Jasper Wildfire Climate Change Risk Assessment Report, which was issued in January of 2024. And I was astounded by what I found. So I'll be discussing that as well. Let's get on with the show. So there's a new post-wildfire assessment on Jasper, and the Alberta government is being blamed for creating command challenges. And the blame game has turned into something comical at the Beaverton. Daniel Smith demands apology from the town of Jasper for catching fire. Naheed Nenshi, leader of the NDP in Alberta, really made a scathing commentary, posted it on X, claimed that the province was exploiting a life and death moment to pick more fights with the feds. I think I'll show you information that might change your mind on that, but let's have a look. Now, one of the reasons why these environmental groups and climate activists are jumping on wildfires and floods and such like to exploit your fear of climate change is that public interest in climate action is actually waning. So, climate action, no one cares. For Canadians, according to an Abacus poll, climate change and the environment comes in at just 14%, in 8th place on a list of 13 priorities. And in our American cousins to the south, their survey finds that dealing with climate change is in 15th place out of 18 priorities at 40%. Here's the Abacus data graph, and you can see that climate change and the environment are really not top of mind. Of course, the NDP are more committed to it than the other political groups. You can see cost of living, Donald Trump and his administration, the economy. These are the top 3 issues for Canadians. And for our American cousins, here you see dealing with climate change way down the list. But wildfire is the ideal psychological weapon to nudge citizen support for climate action because it is terrifying. Ironically, the data shows that the world is burning ever less, but fire is ever more in the news. The news media now writes 400% more about wildfire, so maybe that's why people are so scared. But when you look at the data, it's really not that scary, is it? Look at this. The means are actually not very scary at all. We did have this one year here, this anomaly year, 2023, but beyond that, it doesn't look like there's any trend toward more or bigger wildfires. But Canada is funding a number of climate change nudge units and researchers. So they're trying to nudge you, they're trying to change your behavior so that you will take climate action the way they want you to do. And Innovation Canada Foundation, when we look up climate change behavior for their funding, we find they've funded 1,778 projects with a total contribution of $1.2 billion. So $1.2 billion would fire smart a lot of forest. And as I was recording this, up popped this story in the Western Standard. Nudge, nudge. Even the Privy Council office has a psychological unit to shape Canadians' behavior. Climate change is one of the things they focus on. They're spending $720 million on that. And ironically, climate fanatics don't seem to know that Canada's boreal forest must burn to renew. So here's Chris Hatch in the National Observer, and he's trying to tie the who, what, when, where, why of journalism. He's trying to tie the why of wildfires to fossil fuel use. And he's claiming that over 5.5 million hectares of forest have gone up in flames so far this year. Well, that's about the size of Costa Rica. So here's Costa Rica on a map fight overlay. And you can see that it's significant, but it's not that big. We've got lots of forest left. So public support for climate action is being driven by shameless conflation of wildfire and fossil fuel use. In Chris Hatch's article, he goes on to talk about Professor Catherine Hayhoe. And she's talking about a new report in Nature Climate Change, which says simple exposure to extreme weather events does not affect people's view of climate action. So let's say something bad happens to you, a flood, a big storm, tornado. That doesn't mean that you will attach it to climate change. But if you're a media personality or influencer and you link those events to climate change, then it might stick with that person or with the public. And so, until we name the cause, we can't address it. Until we connect fossil fuels to climate change impacts in our everyday conversations, our news coverage, and our political discourse, we'll keep fueling a worsening spiral. Well, that's assuming that fossil fuels drive climate change, and there's no evidence to support that. Now remember, the mayor of Jasper signed this, Elbows Up for Climate Action. And this open letter from several mayors and councillors across Canada seem to think that wildfires are unusual. In fact, they are necessary. But here they're talking about they were stunned when Lytton disappeared off the map. Parts of Halifax went up in flames. Last year, wildfires engulfed the iconic and beloved Jasper. What's next? Who's next? We can't keep watching our homes, towns, and forests burn to a crisp and pretend the status quo is working or safe. Well, that's true. Then we have to get busy with Fire Smart. But what do they recommend? Not more wildfire equipment or personnel or water bombers or budgets. No, they recommend an east-west clean electricity grid to build a national high-speed rail network, to build 2 million non-market energy-efficient homes, heat pumps for all, and to fund a national resilience, response, and recovery strategy. None of these things will address climate change. In fact, they have huge embedded GHG emissions. So if that's what you think is causing climate change, you're asking for way more GHG emissions. And these are tragedies. These are terrible things that happen to people. But there's lots that we can do about it, that we already know about, and lots of things we just didn't do. So maybe we should look at that first. And even Tim Hodgson, our Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, jumped into the act. We can't afford to be only reactive when it comes to wildfires. Not in a world where fires are growing in intensity and frequency. And as you saw in the graph before, fires are not growing in intensity and frequency. And so that's why we're taking action under the G7 Kananaskis Wildfire Charter. So they're putting together the Wildfire Resilience Consortium of Canada. But in fact, the CO2 Coalition says that wildfires, misleading charts, only present data that appears to support a massive increase in wildfires. But when you examine the entire 100-year database, you reveal a completely different perspective that shows a dramatic decrease in the amount of acres torched by fires. And also they point out that CO2 works as a fire suppressant. So here's the Kananaskis Wildfire Charter, which was put together at the G7 in Kananaskis. And of course, the media were shocked that the G7 leaders released a wildfire charter with no mention of climate change. But wildfire is unrelated to climate change. From our wildfire and forestry correspondent, the boreal across Canada is a fire-dominated landscape. It's characterized by relatively long periods of low incidence of fire interspersed with pulses of high fire activity. So here's Catherine Hayhoe. This tweet is from the Chris Hatch article. Wildfire health impacts continue, but research shows that if we do not directly connect extremes with how they're being driven by a warming climate, being affected by disasters won't make us more willing to support and advocate for climate action. That's why it's so important we talk about it. And our wildfire consultant said, what is the forest that Chris Hatch and others are imagining? Is it climate change? Well, this is from Roger Pielke Jr. He's been a climate policy analyst for most of his professional life. He's consulted with the insurance industry on disasters and climate risk for at least 25 years. And in this article, he states that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has not detected or attributed fire occurrence or area burned to human-caused climate change. Well, he's an expert in that field. It's curious that all these activists do the exact opposite. They must be following the nudge unit recommendations. So the federal government allocated $32 million to BC for fighting wildfires. That was in 2023. In the same year, they allocated $32 billion collectively to Stellantis and VW to build EV batteries. So just for perspective, they gave 32 of these to BC for wildfire fighting, and they gave 32 of these to Stellantis and VW to build EV batteries, which they're not doing. Climate fanatics conflate wildfires and extreme weather to push the public to pay for and accept climate action. So this is the peer-reviewed paper that Catherine Hayhoe and Chris Hatch were referring to. I noticed that it's co-authored by Nomi Reskes and Sandra van der Linden. Both of these two have done a lot of consensus studies. And why does that matter? Well, the 97% consensus studies are really a method of bandwagoning. You know, humans are herd animals. We like to go along with each other. That's the whole principle behind fashion and safety, because as a herd back in the day, or as a tribe back in the day, you didn't want to be excluded or left behind, because on your own you'd die. So it elicits a great deal of fear within us to think of ourselves as being outside the pack. That's why the claim of, telling people that they're a climate denier is so effective, because people don't want to be, excluded and ostracized. But when I see the names of these two researchers on a paper, that immediately twigs my radar. So that's where I say to myself, okay, let's be very cautious about this report. And sure enough, we find that most people support climate policies and link extreme weather events to climate change. If you can do subjective attribution of extreme weather, then it is positively associated with policy support for 5 widely discussed climate policies. So, but science is supposed to be about objectivity, not subjectivity, not emotion. And lately, we've had all of these articles pop up about wildfire written by the people at the Canadian Climate Institute. The Canadian Climate Institute claims to be an independent think tank, but it is funded 79.76% by the government. And it was republished, these articles were republished in other media that is also funded by the government. And they mention the Jasper wildfire. That's the springboard. So you can see here that the Canadian Climate Institute, according to the CRA, received $6.6 million in funding, 79.76% of their funding from governments. And media publishers are also government funded. Corporate Knights, Observer Media, which is the National Observer. So climate fanatics blame climate change, but in fact, the burn size and intensity of a fire grows with the time interval of no burn. Forest stands do not exist forever. They die and are replaced. There's nothing magical here. Nothing Indigenous cultural burns would change. So if we go back to the new post-wildfire assessment on Jasper, let's look and see what else we find. Well, if we go back to when the fire began, sure enough, the environmental groups were already exploiting the Jasper wildfire, blaming oil and gas and condemning Alberta right after the fire in 2024. So they were claiming that urgent action must be taken to hold the oil and gas industry accountable for the devastation it causes. We must end our collective dependence on fossil fuels. Well, how would you fight a wildfire if you don't have choppers and water bombers and heavy equipment? So they want these things. They want to exploit the Jasper wildfire to force these things, to regulate and cap the industry's climate pollution, to end the flow of private and public funds to oil and gas, to redirect those funds to affected communities and those currently dependent on fossil revenue, and regulating the financial institutes bankrolling fossil fuel projects. So this is effectively the tar sands campaign, but with a wildfire mask. And of course, we have to be very grateful that people escaped with their lives. Only one person died. A wildland firefighter sadly died in this Jasper wildfire. But none of the 25,000 Jasper wildfire evacuees would be alive today without fossil fuels, and nothing of the town would remain. Now, I think this is an important video for everybody to watch because it can help you fix up your place or help others fix up their place to reduce the risk of wildfire. Because it wasn't the wall of flames, that terrifying wall of flames we just saw, that took out the Jasper homes and infrastructure. It was an ember storm, firebrands, these little guys. Some of them are big guys too, like flaming pine cones were reportedly being cast many miles, many kilometers from the fire. But there were high winds as well as high intensity fire. So this little plan is very important for everybody to study and do what you can around your house to get it shipshape. Because the majority of homes lost to wildfire are first ignited by embers and small flames. So on the previous page, I had a link to a YouTube video. Please watch it. If you're Canadian, download this guide and have a look. There's also other guides related to communities and such like on the Fire Smart website. If you're an American, have a look at Firewise. Both of these have very good insights about wildfire, but they also address different regional or provincial or state policies and practices. So that's the difference. But there's very good information in both and on both sites. So last year, Chris Hatch was calling it the pyrocene, but it's not the pyrocene. It's not a fossil-fueled pyrocene that we're in. It's poor forest management, and it's not climate change. And just so you know, these two are husband and wife. Tzipora Berman led the tar sands campaign. She's now leading the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. You can be sure that none of our competitor nations, Russia, Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, none of them will be signing this. And in 2023, the federal government exploited wildfire disaster to push a global price on carbon at UN Climate Week. So here's Minister Guilbeault telling everyone, climate change is seen in our wildfires. And that year we did have an extraordinary number of them, an extraordinary number of acres, hectares burned. But there were also reasons for that, which I won't go into now. So if we go to the recent discussion about the after action of the Jasper wildfire. When the Jasper wildfire broke out, CNCP, the rail line, was ready to bring in heavy equipment by train. And that would have been very helpful to clear a lot of fire breaks. But I suspect that being in a national park, nobody wanted things to look very ugly. So that's a speculative comment on my part. But things they did do, they deployed fire suppression trains. They have a couple of them, and they're very familiar with putting out fires because fires do happen from trains passing. So they have a lot of expertise in that area. They also offered critical support by supplying 20,000 liters of fuel to Jasper Park Lodge. They assisted evacuation logistics, extended help to Valemont, which was where many of the Jasper residents temporarily located. So just imagine though, the CNCP line goes through Jasper also right to Edmonton, where they have a big intermodal distribution center for all of North America. And so they had to reroute all this freight. So just imagine how complex that was. You can read all the other things that they've done here, but they really helped, and they were barely mentioned. They were mentioned in the report that they were sort of they were consulted, but, no mention of what they did. And as of July 21st, 2025, Jasper issued this statement, which details and lauds Alberta's effort. And you can see Alberta really gave its all to try and help Jasper and save Jasper. So the Jasper After Action Review does not address Parks Canada activity, and it doesn't include the CNCP contribution, but it does single out Alberta, so that's kind of weird. Now, did Alberta have a reason for concern or so-called interference during the wildfire? Well, yes, because the Climate Risk Assessment Report of January 18th, 2024, that's this, funded by the Alberta government, reveals a shocking lack of situational awareness regarding imminent wildfire risk to Jasper due to the 150,000 hectares of standing deadwood from the mountain pine beetle. Instead, the $79,500 report is contemplating potential climate risks 30, 50, 100 years from now. Meanwhile, clearing out forest deadwood costs about $10,000 a hectare. So this could have done a lot of good work on the ground instead of fantasizing about decades down the road. Well, maybe no one wanted to damage Jasper's pristine natural beauty by aggressively removing red dead trees, but this is a false vanity which could have killed 25,000 people had the wildfire trapped them in the valley. So this has been known for some time. Jasper was a wildfire disaster. Not if, but when. And we have a whole presentation on this from last year on our website. So please do look for that. And maybe climate change is not a priority. So that's the grant. And here's some of the excerpts from that report. It appears almost that they were blind to the possible total destruction of Jasper or the deaths of thousands of people due to the 150,000 hectares of dead and dying trees. They were sitting right beside an unlit inferno. Now, in this report, they say discussions with the municipality of Jasper and Parks Canada noted that the public may be more fearful than warranted due to strong fire management practices in place. So the public had originally set a score of hazard of 5 for wildfire, but they reduced it to 4 after reviewing the extensive work already being done to reduce the impact of wildfire. And here it seems another astonishing lack of awareness. They're concerned about having a poor reputation or damage to buildings or power outages. It seems that no one thought of what is the worst case scenario. And was Jasper really fire smarted? Well, some, but probably not enough. And you can see this grant is from 2021 and this one's from 2019. It looks like a lot of money, but it doesn't really go that far when you have so much deadwood around to clear out. And in my opinion, it was a failure by Parks Canada to see reality. So they interviewed the Parks Canada staff. They said they've got 2 firefighting teams based in Jasper. They're doing proactive monitoring, that Parks Canada is the sole authority for the Fire Smart program. And these actions reduce the potential consequence of wildfire on Jasper. Parks Canada expressed that the actual risk of a fire is less than the public perception. I'm sorry, that just blows my mind. Meanwhile, what was Alberta up to? Well, annoying interference, or was it legitimate need to know to deal with logistics and services? Alberta was fighting 149 other wildfires and handling evacuations from some of those, so they had to be ready for additional food, water, and accommodation for Jasper. There were some 20,000 domestic and international tourists in Jasper, some 5,000 residents. Jasper, confusingly, is an Alberta provincial municipality, even though it's located in a federal park. Several adjacent Alberta cities and towns were at risk of the wildfire spreading. Alberta Wildfire was well aware of the extreme vapor pressure deficit, atmospheric conditions, and high unpredictable winds. These make it almost impossible to fight a fire. And so the need for additional air-ground rescue would have to be coordinated. Additional firefighter services, heavy equipment logistics. The CNCP rail line goes through Jasper. It feeds Edmonton's intermodal inland rail port. It also brings, food and supplies that are needed every day in the city, and takes out agricultural supplies to the port, other manufactured goods from Edmonton. All that had to be rerouted. Some of those things would have been priority. Trans-Canada Highway also goes right through Jasper, handles huge volumes of goods and services in and out by semi-trailer and truck, and the TMX pipeline goes through Jasper, primarily underground. So there was a heightened risk, and if you go through the fire weather maps, you can go back in time and see how from July 1st, where it looked like there was a dangerous situation developing, by July 12th, look at this, the prairies were in extreme and very high risk, and so were the mountain parks. And the vapor pressure deficit, extreme lack of humidity. According to our wildfire consultant, he suggested that the park should have been closed and access to backcountry limited as of July 1st, 2024, to minimize the risk to the population. And the Jasper wildfire grew very rapidly, so certainly there would have been confusion and difficulty in coordinating all the 3 different levels of government and their firefighting and emergency management teams. So it was relatively small. This is huge, but in the context of things, it was relatively small on the 22nd. Look how quickly it grew, 23rd, 24th, and by August 14th, it was enormous. So red trees are dead trees. This was the road into Malign Lake, and it actually looks very beautiful, but these are all danger zones. These are all standing deadwood, firecrackers waiting to go up. Alberta Wildfire fights hundreds of fires every year, probably more than are fought in the parks. So you can imagine that they would be on the ball and very concerned about these conditions. So how much of Jasper National Park was burned? Well, the land base is 1.1 million hectares. The forested land base is about 730,000 hectares. The actual fire complex of 2024 burnt 32,000 hectares, or 4% of the forested area of the park, and that was mostly confined to the Athabasca Valley. And you can see here the historical record of burns. But this was the biggest fire in a century, and that's not good news, because you need to have smaller fires every few years. So, how big was the Jasper Park mountain beetle infestation? Well, 93,000 hectares of dead and dying pine. And so this is the calculation of what that would be, 10 million cubic meters of fuel. And just to give you some kind of visual example, here's what 1 million cubic meters of fuel looks like. So having gone from 2 wildfire fighting teams in Jasper under Parks Canada management over the course of the incident, this is from their Facebook page, over 3,000 personnel were working on the fire. And just to let you know, the actual population of Jasper in 2021 was about 4,700 people. So just imagine how many other people were brought in to fight this fire. And thank God they were successful. And great thanks to all of them. And look at this, Jasper the bear. He survived. So that's fantastic. But as pointed out in Sean Amato's post here, this is the largest fire in the park in 100 years. Well, yeah, these trees should be renewing every, 40, 60, 100 years. There should be natural fires burning them off. Now we have a number of video explainers about wildfires. This one is specifically about the Jasper wildfire. It's quite detailed. This one is about the Yellowknife evacuation and what the amazing things did. These group of volunteers did when everyone had evacuated. They cleared hectares of fire breaks in the space of a few hours or days and set up jerry-rigged water cannons. They did amazing things. It's really worth watching because it shows what a dedicated, committed community can do in the face of emergency. This one is about the Kelowna catastrophe, and you can see in this one how municipal permitting is problematic and how people are planting conifers right beside their house and building their houses side by side. And it's an invitation to disaster. And this one exposes the Canada's climate cult of magical thinking about how the ENGOs conflated wildfire, and they came up with all kinds of reasons why big oil caused the fire in Jasper. Completely untrue. So we break it all down in this one. So are we done with the expensive climate hysteria yet? Because, the government is spending a few million on wildfire management, but it's spending between 2020 and 2030 $476 billion on climate change, or $11,900 per resident of Canada. So you can see these reports on our blog. You can get the summary at this report on the Western Standard. This is a fortune, and most people don't even know that it's being spent. But many people would say, well, you know what? If we're going to stop climate change, I'm okay with spending lots of money. Except, here's the outcome. The global average temperature would be reduced by 0.007 degrees Celsius, 7/1000ths of a degree Celsius as of 2100, compared to the case if Canada does nothing. So all that money is not buying you climate change action, or it's not stopping you stopping climate change either. And if we look at the graph here, supposedly by 2026, which is in just a few months, we're supposed to hit this target for greenhouse gas reductions. Does that look realistic to you? And then by 2030, this one. So obviously that means degrowth and deindustrialization and probably personal rationing if we're mad enough to go through with it for no reasonable outcome. And of course, Clintel, the climate intelligence unit out of the Netherlands, will tell you that there's no climate emergency. And almost 2,000 scientists and scholars have signed the World Climate Declaration, which explains why there is no climate emergency. Mother Nature rules, just as she does in the forest. So we hope that you will join us in the race from net zero. Yeah, it's big, scary stuff. And we have this wonderful little book. It's really all you need to know in one tiny little book, just 88 pages. It's very colorful. It's a quick read and very simple sections, so you can find information quickly. Lots of people are buying 5, 10, 15 and, giving them to friends or other people of influence who they think should have it. It's $15 Canadian per copy, plus shipping, and you can order it online. So thanks very much for listening to this presentation, and feel free to put some comments down below. Please like and share. Please subscribe. Please join us. Please donate. Please support our work to try and bring open civil debate and full cost-benefit analysis to climate and energy policies, preferably before they're implemented. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling. Thanks.